Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're jumping right into the mechanics of calculating water stress sourcing metrics for the alcoholic beverage industry. If you're in sustainability accounting or supply chain management, you already know that tracking where your materials come from isn't just a nice-to-have anymore, right? It's absolute baseline data. So we're going to learn exactly how to measure one of the biggest environmental risks out there.
Think about your absolute favorite drink for a second. Beer, wine, spirits, whatever it is, they all rely almost entirely on agricultural inputs. Barley, sugar, corn, grapes. But what happens when the regions growing those crops suddenly run dry? Well, we see fluctuating supply, massive price volatility, and serious disruptions. Basically, no water means no ingredients, which means no product.
To actually get a handle on this exposure, we rely on the benchmark for sustainability accounting, the SASB standards, which are now part of the IFRS Foundation. Specifically, we're looking at the food and beverage sector standard for alcoholic beverages. It gives us a really rigorous, standardized framework for tracking these risks, making sure investors and companies are all speaking the exact same language.
Okay, here's our roadmap for today. 1. The Water Sourcing Challenge. 2. Meet Metric FB AB 440A1. 3. Identifying Tier 1 suppliers. 4. Defining baseline water stress. And finally, 5. Calculating the percentage.
Let's jump right into Section 1. The Water Sourcing Challenge. Sourcing in a changing climate.
Look, the industry's ability to source agricultural inputs is tied directly to the climate. When water scarcity hits, you get intense price volatility and shrinking supply availability. If a company ignores these resource threats, it's a direct hit to profitability. I mean, if a region goes into severe drought, your production lines literally stop. It's really that simple.
Moving along to Section 2, Meet Metric FB AB 440A.1. The ingredient sourcing standard. So here it is, the exact metric code from the standard. FB AB 440A.1. Categorized under ingredient sourcing, this is a quantitative measure that evaluates the percentage of beverage ingredients sourced from regions with high or extremely high baseline water stress. And notice the unit of measure here. It's a percentage, and it's specifically calculated by cost. Before we do any math, let's quickly deconstruct this into its three core components so we know exactly what variables we're tracking down. First, like we just said, it calculates a percentage by cost, not volume or weight. Second, it focuses purely on beverage ingredients. And third, it specifically targets regions experiencing high or extremely high water stress.
All right, Section 3, Identifying Tier 1 suppliers. Who are we actually measuring?
What's really interesting here is how tightly SASB defines the scope. We are only looking at Tier 1 suppliers. And what does that mean? It means the suppliers that transact directly with the beverage entity for agricultural products. So you're not digging 5 layers deep into the global commodity market. You're just looking at the entities your company is actively cutting checks to for those inputs. But what if your supply chain is incredibly complex and you just don't know where some of those Tier 1 suppliers are sourcing their water? Well, the standard has a rule for that. If you can't collect data for all your Tier 1 suppliers, you have to disclose the percentage of products where the source region is just unknown. You can't just quietly leave it out. You have to be totally transparent about the blind spots in your data.
That brings us to Section 4, Defining Baseline Water Stress, Measuring the Risk.
We're not just guessing the risk here, and we definitely don't rely on internal company definitions. This is where it gets rigorously objective. The standard mandates the use of a very specific tool, the World Resources Institute's Water Risk Atlas tool, also known as Aqueduct. This is a brilliant requirement because it ensures every single company reporting this metric is using the exact same baseline data to determine geographic water stress.
So when you plug your supplier locations into the Aqueduct tool, you're hunting for 2 specific thresholds. You're looking for locations classified with high baseline water stress, which means a score between 40 and 80%. And then you're looking for extremely high baseline water stress, which is anything over a staggering 80%. If a supplier is in a region hitting either of those tiers, their costs go right into our calculation. Finally, Section 5, Calculating the percentage, Building the formula. Think of this as your risk visibility blueprint. It's a straightforward 3-step procedure. Step 1, identify all your Tier 1 suppliers and find out where they consume water. Step 2, run those locations through the WRI Aqueduct tool to find the ones in those high or extremely high stressed regions. And Step 3, divide the costs from those stressed regions by your total Tier 1 costs. The actual math boils down to this equation. Just take the cost of beverage ingredients purchased from Tier 1 suppliers in those stressed regions and divide it by the total cost of beverage ingredients purchased from all of your Tier 1 suppliers. That gives you your final percentage by cost.
Just to be absolutely precise with the standard, and you definitely want your math to be flawless here, always double-check your inputs. Make sure your numerator only includes the cost from the specific regions that WRI defined as high or extremely high stress. And your denominator? That has to capture the entirety of your Tier 1 agricultural spend. That final ratio is the exact number investors will look at to gauge your supply chain's true vulnerability.
Taking a step back from the numbers for a second, the standard reminds us exactly why this matters. It says, ultimately, climate change, water scarcity, and land use restriction present risks to an entity's long-term ability to source key materials and ingredients. It's not just about checking a box for regulatory compliance. It's about spotting existential threats to your business model before they become financial disasters.
So as we wrap up this explainer, think about this. Once you've mapped those Tier 1 suppliers, run the aqueduct analysis, and calculated your final percentage, what is that number actually telling you? If your percentage is high, how resilient is your supply chain to the climate realities of tomorrow? It's an incredibly powerful metric, and now you know exactly how to calculate it.